So, make yourself comfortable. All right, good afternoon, still going here. Welcome if you're tuning in now or joining us in the room at Politico's Sustainable Future Week Summit. My name is Douglas Buzzvine, and I am Agriculture and Trade Editor at Politico. Well, I'm delighted to welcome on stage Jon Turney. You've got two jobs, right? President, EMEA Oilseeds, and Group Chief Risk Officer at ADM. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you.
You grew up on a farm, right? You've come a long way. How did your journey lead you to ADM?
Yeah, I grew up on a farm. So from man and boy, I was sweeping sheds and driving tractors, and I loved it. But I always, in my heart, I wanted to trade grains. So I took my career more in that path. And so I've been trading grains for ADM for the last 15 years or so, and the last 2 years has become a lot more managerial, and therefore with the transition into the sustainable world, just spent a much larger proportion of my time now is spent in the sustainability space. I want to say I think that was a fabulous debate we just had. Three very, the whole spectrum of the industry that we deal with on stage at the same time. I don't envy lawmakers having to try and create regulation for such a complicated space. I don't envy the farmer in today's world, right? Mm-hmm. Having grown up on a farm, there are so many complications. There is a lot of paperwork. There is a lot of challenges. Prices are very, very volatile. And this makes income streams and investment in their business very, very challenging. And then I live in the world today a little bit more as the gentleman from McCain, in terms of how you try to navigate all three of those areas and have products that are available for the end user, buying from farmers, supporting farmers, because without them, we're nothing. That supply chain is absolutely imperative. So, very, very challenging for all three of them. And I think having all three of them on stage at the same time really kind of summarized the challenge that all of us in this room face in terms of how we make sure that, in 30, 50, 100 years' time, our children, our grandchildren, the next generations continue to provide and have food. We're going to have in the region of 2 billion more people in just 25 or 30 years' time. And
yeah, I mean, we're not allowed to have sustainability fatigue just yet because we've got a couple more days of the summit. But well, I'd like to come back to that. I mean, just to very briefly get an overview of what you do. I mean, could you just talk a little bit about the business, the oilseeds business? We're in Europe. We have a European policy audience here. How can you explain just in the briefest of terms, what you source here, what you import, and what different challenges those in the simplest terms present to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the oilseeds business at ADM. We crush in the region of 11 million tons of commodities. That's predominantly sunflower, rapeseed, and soybeans. In terms of where we source those from, in the region of 40 to, depending on every year, it varies and changes. 40 to 50% of that is sourced from here in Europe, in the region of 20% from South America, and then probably around about 20-25% in North America, and then a few other bits and pieces like some Australian canola and so on and so forth. So that's the bulk of what we do in terms of crushing, and then we're refining large proportions of the oil, and we're then producing biodiesel from some of that. But the biggest bulk is trying to supply the protein needs here in Europe with soybean meal, rape meal, and sunflower meal.
All right, and your newer hat is risk as Chief Risk Officer. I mean, I think we're in the capital of regulatory risk, but there's a bunch of other risk. I mean, what kind of risk, preoccupies you the most? What is it? Market? Is it environmental? Is it competitive? Or what are you focused on most of all?
I think I would. Risk it's a huge topic. For me, I kind of bucket it probably into 3 different areas. The first one is anything that has anything to do with any kind of financial risk for the organization. And by that, I'm not just talking about, buy today and the price, maybe goes down and therefore you lose some money. Though, of course, that is part of it. But, we as an organization you can make and lose money through a whole series of challenges. And in terms of making sure that you're relevant, you remain relevant, you're able to continue to operate in the organization, to make sure that you operate within all the legislation and the rules and so on and so forth. Secondly, there's definitely this kind of risk around our customers and our suppliers. Without those 2 groups, we're nothing, right? I mean, that's why that's why we come to work every day, to make sure that we have farmers farming sustainably, but farmers being able to continue to supply organizations like ours for the long term, and making sure that we're producing products that are relevant to our customer. And being here for Sustainability Week, I think it's really important. I mean, the customer today, they all have different needs. They all have different sustainability needs. Sustainability, I'm sure if I asked everyone in the room what sustainability was, I'd probably get 100 different answers. Everyone has a slightly different version of the truth. For me, it's all about making sure that we have sustainable businesses for the long term, and that means sustainable farming practices to make sure that our farms remain sustainable. And then, the third risk is clearly climate change, and the risk around everything to do with that. We put a lot of effort into regenerative agricultural practices, but regen ag is an interesting topic. I mean, I was driving tractors 30 years ago on a farm, being told off by my father for driving a tractor along the field's edge, instead of getting off and onto the path, because that compressed the soil, and would have a negative impact on yield. Regenerative agriculture is a modern phrase for something that many farmers in Europe have been doing for many, many years. We've been reducing tillage for 20, 30 years. The key now is how we try to capture the data around it, how we take that data and use it for good, and to make sure that we're able to, the gentleman before talked about the benefits of regenerative agriculture in the yields they were finding in potato growing in Canada, and making sure that we take all that data and we actually make it real for farmers. Because it is very expensive today, but sustainable farming has to be sustainable for the future. And so we have to make sure that everything we do isn't just paid for, that it's giving a benefit, it's giving yield benefits, it's giving soil health benefits, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, so regulatory risk isn't in your top 3, but I'm still going to ask about it. I mean, I think, because we're in the Brussels bubble, we follow the policy files as they move through, and there's been a lot of movement around the deforestation regulation. First it was going to be implemented, then there's a proposal to delay it. Since we talked to prepare this conversation, the European People's Party wanted to put in some amendments to narrow the scope. Those have now been withdrawn. I mean, how do you deal with this uncertainty, and what kind of costs does it impose on you as a business?
So regulatory risk generally is not something that keeps me up at night. Why? Because as long as regulatory risk affects everyone equally, as long as we have time to implement it, we can go through the process. The global agricultural supply chains, the European farmers, the businesses within our industry are incredibly resilient. And we've always found ways to work through legislation, but making sure that is the regulations are upheld, right? And having that confidence that they're going to be is the big challenge. And EUDR was something that when I first read about the topic, I honestly thought that I was going to be out of a job. I didn't know how we would ever, create a truly segregated soybean supply chain. As a company, we put a huge amount of time, effort, and indeed money into being able to complete that supply chain. We were ready, and the legislation has changed. For our teams who put huge amounts of work into that, it's very disappointing. Financially, it's very disappointing because we've made significant commitments to farmers. We're still paying those farmers for the data that they're providing and for their commitment to those supply chains. So we still have that financial burden. One of the challenges I face today is honestly convincing my boss in the next 6-9 months that we need to go and make that investment again. And how do I get the confidence and how do I give ADM's, the rest of ADM's leadership team the confidence that it's not going to change again?
Right.
Right.
And I think, simplistically, someone like me who doesn't know their way around the business quite so well would assume that, well, it's only kind of a bit of IT, a few techies to sort out the problem. But you're saying there's a heavier investment in the farming relationship there.
Absolutely. I mean, we committed to in the region of 5 million acres of with the farmers and to pay them a premium for that. And we can't walk away from that. We didn't write a clause in the contract that in case it's delayed, the farmer would never have participated, and we have a long-term relationship with them. And it's imperative that we keep that relationship with them. So indeed, very, it's painful. I just hope that we get through this evening and get through this evening's EUDR debate, and we're able to move on, and able to move through, and once we commit to 2026, that's the deadline, and then we're all on the same level playing field, and we have that regulatory certainty that we can try and operate by.
All right, and if we talk about sustainability, even food security, I mean, I think it's very much in the eye of the beholder. Of course, we've heard a bit today about farmers' incomes and how pressed they are. I mean, how do you relate to that? I mean, you're a big buyer from a lot of smaller farmers. I mean, do you think the market mechanisms are working reasonably, or is change needed? I mean, there's been some mutterings around the election period that the unfair trading practices regulation should be updated. Also, marketing. I mean, are we okay, or is there some action needed to level the playing field, there for in the market exchange?
My personal view is that agriculture, in the main, and I'm sure this can't be said for everything everywhere around the world, but in the main, agricultural supply chains are very transparent places.
Right.
There's a lot of players in them. Yes, there's less players, as our farmer colleague mentioned in the last session. There are less participants in the space than there were 10 to 15 years ago. But I also believe that rationalization also significantly reduces costs in the supply chain, and hopefully, therefore, benefits both farmers and consumers at the end of the day. But it's a very transparent supply chain. It's very easy to. It's very easy. We're all audited on a regular basis to make sure that we comply with the rules and regulations, which in many cases are quite stringent. But the books are open and everyone's welcome. And the auditors come and see. And so I actually think that these supply chains work incredibly well. When Ukraine war hit, and we have in the region of 650 colleagues working in Ukraine. We have a crushing facility, crushing sunflowers there. We had to stop production immediately for safety reasons, to ensure their safety. But as an industry and as ADM, we were able to supply all of our customers with something. We had to work with with them as partners to maybe change them from one oil to another. But we were able to supply everyone and ensure that food security, was able to be maintained. Yes, there was price volatility, and I think price volatility is something that it's unavoidable in a supply and demand style of environment. But the volatility aside, we were able to make sure that everyone had the food that they needed, and we're very proud of our ability to do that.
All right. I guess I had one last question about what we eat. Our diets came up a little bit in the previous previous panel discussion. I mean, is the general trend in Europe in particular, maybe for people to eat less meat, is that going to change your business fundamentally? I mean, will Europe remain a net feed importer? How do you look at that, and how do you plan for that sort of outlook?
I mean, I think Europe will always be a net feed importer. I'm quite confident of that. But are we really materially going to be changing diets? Yes, there will be marginal change. I know that 10 or 15 years ago, I ate meat 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Today, it's probably only 70% of that, and maybe that's just my age. I don't know. But certainly diets are changing. But we're going to have in the region of 2 billion more mouths to feed. We're in the space of producing. We're in the space of producing specialty proteins and so on and so forth, and that's a fascinating space. It's a lot less. It's going through some tough times at the moment, but I mean, we've been investing in that space for over 75 years. That in itself is not new, it will change. We will have more and more flexitarians. I think it's good that we all amend our diets and look after ourselves. My wife might not think I do the best job, but I try. But at the same time, we're going to have to continue to produce protein, and we're going to continue to be deficit protein here in Europe. So I do think we continue to import for the long term.
Great. All right, Jon Turney, thank you very much from ADM. Really appreciate the interview. Just very briefly to sum up, sounds like your business is sustainable as a business, certainly. Right, what have we got next? Please remain seated. In a few minutes, our agri-food reporter, Alessandro Ford, will be moderating a panel discussion named Scaling Up Farming Innovation, What's Next for the Block. So thank you again to Jon Turney from ADM. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So you have the stage.
Thank you.